Watch this.
Idaho's anti-abortion law is set to take effect tomorrow. Or is it? We don't know. We're still waiting for a federal judge to decide that. And so are doctors and medical professionals who are left to try and prepare for decisions they have to make about a woman's health. Some college students may be heaving a sigh of relief today as President Biden is forgiving hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt for every student. But an Idaho economics professor says there may be a downside to this move. You know, it's been one of those days, which is a good day to check in with what's happening in the far reaches of the 208. What's the smallest city in Idaho? And is it still a city? All right, we are still about 30 seconds now to the technical end of business. Well, I don't know if the courts follow that rule or not, but we are still waiting for a decision in the DOJ versus Idaho court battle over the state's abortion trigger laws. This trigger law is set to go into effect tomorrow, well, at midnight tonight, which would be technically tomorrow. And under that law, almost all abortions are going to be outlawed in the state of Idaho. An exception, though, to save the life of the mother, exceptions for cases of rape, incest. Those things have to be reported to law enforcement, by the way. So Joe Paris has been waiting just as long as everybody else has across, well, basically the entire state of Idaho. Anybody who has any sort of media pass or just an interest in this has been waiting to see what Judge Windmill is going to say about this case. So what do we know yet?
Well, we don't know a lot, and I know that's kind of a theme sometimes around here is the unknowns. But yeah, I mean, Judge Windmill said in his courtroom on Monday that he wanted to get a decision out before Thursday when the law goes into effect. Judge Windmill even saying on Monday after the hearing, or during the hearing, I should say, that he was hoping to maybe get it out on Tuesday. Here at 5 o'clock, though, on Wednesday, we still don't have an official order from federal court. So, Brian, in terms of the law being paused or a section of the law being paused, we just don't know right now. So we're kind of just
Those are the options, right? Those are the possible outcomes that he is deciding on.
Right, and I think there's a little bit of a misconception out there that the Department of Justice is trying to get the entire law paused. The specific part of the law that we're talking here is about EMTALA, which is a federal law that guarantees treatment for patients that are in a hospital, that they have Medicare funding. There's a discrepancy between the federal law and the state law in terms of at what point can you do an abortion under EMTALA. If a patient needs to be stabilized, an abortion is a medical procedure. They can do that. Under state law, though, Brian, that's just not part of the law. There's an exception to save the life of the mother, which is a higher bar, though, than EMTALA.
Okay, so last Friday, the criminal aspect of the 6-week abortion ban in Idaho went into effect. So that is in play right now. But there's been talk about whether or not this decision that we're expecting today, we assume, could have an impact on that. Is that something that is possible?
No, and it's unclear right now. And what we do understand and what we know from the intent of the legislation is that the trigger law was meant to be a more narrow focus on when abortions can be done. So the trigger law, which is the one we're talking about that'll start tomorrow, that was meant to kind of overwrite the 6-week ban. So we're not exactly sure how this will play out. If a part of the law is paused, will maybe the 6-week partially be on the books? Maybe the trigger law will be fully on the books with an exception. And the legal community, there's not a 100% agreement on how this will play out. So it really depends on what the judge says and kind of what the legal experts interpret.
Okay, we were talking earlier that part of this delay could be caused by some paperwork that was filed on behalf of the state based on what happened in Texas. There was a judge there that actually ruled in favor of the Texas law, which was what Idaho's law was based on. But there's a little bit of difference there, right?
Yeah, so the Texas law, very quickly here, the Texas law has a specific phrase and a specific section in it that says, in the case of an ectopic pregnancy, you can do an abortion. Idaho's law is not that specific, and it just says pregnancy. It doesn't say ectopic or whatever. It just says pregnancy. So the difference between Idaho and Texas there is that Texas's law was written differently in a specific way. So the EMTALA case, it's not the same case that you're making in Texas as you're making in Idaho. However, the state of Idaho, the Deputy Attorney General, they did file a motion in court today that said, hey, we saw this decision in Texas. We want this to be considered as a part of the final judgment. So that might be why we're seeing a delay here. And to be very clear, there's no hard deadline in terms of when Judge Windmill needs to put out his deadline. He said in court that he wanted to get it out on Wednesday before Thursday. If something happened, though, and it complicated his decision, or maybe he had to rewrite something, I mean, the clock keeps tipping. It's not like he has a deadline to meet at 5 o'clock or midnight. The decision could come out next week if that's when it comes out.
That's a possibility, but that law goes into effect at midnight tonight for tomorrow. And if it happens, the decision from Judge Windmill happens between now and 5/26, we'll let you know about it.
All right.
Thank you very much, Joe. All right, we're going to switch gears. Have you ever heard the saying, do first, then ask for forgiveness later? yeah, you've heard that, right? It could just as well go to college first and then figure out how to pay for it later, or then maybe ask for forgiveness for that, because that's what a lot of people are doing right now. And they've been doing it for a long time, paying for college, paying off those student loans, and now wondering how they're going to pay off the rest of them. Recent estimates from the Federal Reserve say American student loan debt, federal student loan debt, nearly $1.75 trillion. And today, the Biden administration announced their plan to tackle the problem. Just forgive it, at least some of it. Here's Andrew Bartline.
The plan after graduation isn't always clear.
That question filled me with so much anxiety, man.
But Brian Stelbotsky is far from unprepared.
Currently a doctoral student here at Boise State.
To get here, Brian first earned his bachelor's and master's from the University of Pittsburgh.
I took on some student debt to help with my undergraduate degree.
That was in 2009, and Brian still pays for it today. He's one of the millions that make up the nearly $1.75 trillion of student loan debt.
It's obviously out of control. It's been a big discussion for a long time and doesn't show any signs of getting better.
And the White House knows it. The Biden administration announced their plan today to control the problem by forgiving debt. Pell Grant recipients can have up to $20,000 of debt canceled. Other federal student loans can expect up to $10,000.
You've got to be joking.
It's exciting news
That is awesome.
for Joe Cole, who just took out a student loan.
It's about $10,000.
He's headed into his freshman year at Boise State. Cole admits he didn't put a lot of thought into a 5-figure loan to begin with.
Definitely kind of flown into it, so.
For a student to qualify for relief, their individual income must be less than $125,000 a year. Household income must be less than $250,000.
Very mixed feelings.
Stephen Peterson is a clinical associate professor of economics at the University of Idaho, and he understands the financial burden students are under just to afford college.
Adjusted for inflation, the tuition that I paid back in the late 70s would have been equivalent to about $1,000 a semester today.
However, Professor Peterson says Biden's announcement could have unintended consequences because the money doesn't just disappear.
It's going to cost around $300 billion. That's what I've seen. It's going to add to the national debt. So I have concerns about that.
The federal debt number is an inconceivable number in my head. Why should I care if it's going to grow even further?
At some point, if the debt gets high enough, it ultimately could threaten the stability of the economic system in the United States. Now, we're nowhere near that, but we've seen countries where that has occurred, such as Greece.
Peterson says this debt forgiveness could incentivize people to take out student loans they can't pay and just expect it to be forgiven in the future.
If the incentives don't line up right, you could actually make the student loan debt worse in the long run.
Even though Brian's debt is manageable,
I'm not going to complain about having some of that relieved, of course.
he says loan forgiveness is a necessity for others who are in far worse positions, all for the same reasons.
I think if we've gotten ourselves into a situation where there's a level of student debt nationally that we're concerned about, then there have to be some discussions about how we've gotten there, how we might change the system or the structures that have enabled us to be there in the first place.
Peterson says he's more in favor of filing for bankruptcy, making it easier for people to file for bankruptcy with student loans. Peterson is afraid this relief money could go toward people who don't necessarily need it, who otherwise are capable of paying off their student loans. With bankruptcy, Brian, the courts can decide on a case-by-case basis who is in the most need. So that money doesn't go in places where perhaps it shouldn't.
Yeah, because, with a student loan, you don't just get to just disregard a federal student loan when you declare bankruptcy. At least that's how I was told, and that's kind of how that plays out. Is that different now where you can?
I know it's very difficult to get a federal loan under bankruptcy. The laws have changed with time. It is extremely difficult to make that happen. If you got that loan, you got to pay it back. You cannot file for bankruptcy. It is extremely rare.
Okay, you and I were talking about this earlier. Like as you heard one of the people say, I don't know, I'm just flying by the seat of my pants in this and just basically gambling on yourself, taking a business loan to say I'm going to pay this back because I'm going to be the business that you're going to invest in. There's a lot of people, including myself, I'll be honest, that just went into college thinking, I don't know how I'm going to pay for it, but I'll take that money and I'll pay for it later.
Yeah, out of the people I talked to today, just walking around Boise State, I confidently say I probably talked to about 100 people. I was there for a couple hours. Most of them really were not fully aware of what they were going to when they got these loans, or a lot of them don't even know how they're going to college. I asked them, what are you doing? How is this going to impact you? They said, I don't really know. I'm just here.
I know. Another thing, I did a little research because, again, this is one of those things where I don't have a grasp of this, because some people are claiming they have $30,000 in debt when it comes to student loans. I'm going to date myself here, but when I went to college, it was about $1,000 a year, to go to school. And that the same school right now is about $11,000, which is amazing to me how this happens, that inflation, which if we account for inflation, it would only be about $2,000, but instead it's $11,000. So I can see where we got to this point, I guess, right?
I got friends from school who probably owe $80,000, so it gets real worse than that.
And so that's why these 10,000s, or at least 20,000 in some cases, is very welcomed. Okay, so Andrew, thank you very much. How did we get here on this? How did nearly 45 million people get into this $1.75 trillion hole to the federal government? Here in Idaho, we have 218,000 with federal student loan debt who owe about $7.2 billion, which is about an average about $33,000 each. These numbers from the Education Data Initiative back in April. I'm willing to bet a lot of them either didn't realize what they were getting into, like we just discussed, or the cost of college just keeps going up, which is true, yes. So if that was you, and you took a federal student loan to pay for higher ed, you agreed to paying it back in one of several ways. There's the standard repayment plan, where you paid a fixed payment for over a 10-year period. Paying the same amount for 120 months saves you money and interest, but those payments are going to be a bit higher than the other repayment plans, like the graduated repayment plan. Choosing this option doesn't qualify you for a loan forgiveness program because, well, that loan could be as long as 30 years, especially if you consolidated or combined your loans. And your payments increase over time with that one. The extended repayment plan might be what you chose if you had more than $30,000 in college debt, because you could stretch that payback time frame to about 25 years. And those monthly payments, well, they could be fixed or they could be graduated. But if you wanted to pay less, and maybe over a longer period of time, maybe you chose a repayment plan that depends on your income. And there are 4 plans under this category, depending on which one you're paying 10 to 20% of your discretionary income. That number is determined by the government. But let's focus on just one of those. The income-based repayment plan takes a percentage of your discretionary income, what you have left after paying for stuff like rent, food, that kind of thing. Without getting into the formula that they use, let's say you have a $30,000 loan. You're married, you got a kid, you're making $35,000 a year at your job, and with a 10-year standard plan, well, you'd be paying $311 a month. But under the income-based plan, based on that 10% of your discretionary income, you'd be paying about $20 a month, $20.17 a month. So that's how it's set up now. But what about going forward? Well, the Biden administration today came up with a new rule for repayments to make it more manageable, they say. And there are 4 parts to this perspective plan. Instead of a minimum of 10% of your income, they're going to drop that down to 5% for your discretionary income, and then raise the amount of what they would consider non-discretionary income, protecting it. That stuff you use to pay for rent and food, they're going to protect it from being part of your repayment formula. Meaning if you're making $15 an hour, you won't have to pay anything. The third one on this is the forgive the balances after 10 years, instead of 20 for those who still owe less than $12,000. And the 4th element to this is, well, they're going to cover the borrower's unpaid monthly interest. So as long as you're making payments, your balance won't grow.
I move, pursuant to Section 74-204 Idaho Code, that the agenda be amended to add a discussion item on the upcoming special legislative session and implications it has for education funding.
Another meeting there, but sticking with school and sticking with money involved with it, the Idaho Board of Education reacting to Governor Little's proposal. Yesterday, he announced a special session of the Idaho legislature. They're going to be considering tax relief and new dedicated funds for state schools. And if approved, well, public schools are going to get another $410 million. Not surprisingly, as you heard, the board says this proposal has their full support.
I think this is potentially the biggest thing that's happened for Idaho education, at least since I've been tracking what's going on. This is a significant investment, not only in our K-12 system, but in our higher ed system. But this is really a placeholder of $330 million for K-12, an additional 80 for higher ed. And what's occurred to me is it's being dedicated as sales tax, which is arguably the most reliable form of revenue. And it's an ongoing investment. It's not a one.
And there are a lot of ideas out there on what they could do with this money. So what do board members expect they want to do with some of this money?
The onus on us is now to show a return on that investment. And where I really focus, and we know we're going to have a lot of noise in sort of the metrics as in K-12 because of the pandemic. But what I told them is if we do nothing else, we have to move the literacy dial in K-12, because that's one we should be able to move quickly. And so I think it's really going to be important if we want to see continued investments in education that we start seeing those numbers move.
As you probably know, Idaho's pretty low on that literacy dial. You heard the board president say they're going to focus that for K through 12 students. In higher education, they said they're going to focus on that on-time graduation. You know, Idaho's home to a lot of places that have that small town feel. But there's one town that probably takes the cake when it comes to the Gem State's smallest. It's about the size of 30 football fields. We're going to take you there after the break. But right now, we want you to reach out to the 208. We want to hear what you think about today's show. You can be part of our conversation. Text us at 208-321-5614. Send us your comments, your questions, even your complaints. And we could share yours if it's, well, clean, concise, and clever at the end of the show. You know, some days we on the 208 team decide it would be a good idea to take a shot in the dark. You know, look up some random city in Idaho and just give them a call, see what's up. Today was one of those days. You know, we typed smallest city in Idaho into the old Google machine, and it came up with this place in the Panhandle. A sub-city, it's called, smack dab in the middle of Coeur d'Alene and Post Falls. The sign out front says it was incorporated in 1905, so it's been around and been a city for a long time. But as we found out today, it may not be for much longer. Apparently, it's the smallest city in Idaho, like just 30 acres.
Yep, and I was unaware of that. I know it's a tiny town. It's sort of sandwiched between Coeur d'Alene, which is large, and Post Falls, which is large and growing.
What's the name of your town? How do you say it?
It's Huetter.
Huetter.
Mm-hmm.
How many different versions of the town have you heard?
We all pronounce it the same way. A lot of people say Hooter or something like that, but Huetter has always been the pronunciation.
Yeah, you probably don't want to be known as Hooter.
No.
What goes on in the town of Huetter?
Not very much.
So how would you describe Huetter?
It's a really tiny bedroom community. Back in the 70s, it was kind of a burgeoning little town. It was on the main highway, on Highway 10, before I-90 went through. There was a sawmill and a bar and a dance club. But after the freeway went through and the other towns around it started growing, the population really changed, and it's now mostly rentals.
Mostly rentals. Like, for a fact, you don't even live there. Is that correct?
No, I own one of the apartment buildings.
How many people would you say do live there?
That live in a house they own? Maybe five. Between 5 and 8.
5 to 8 people.
Uh-huh.
But it has like a population of about 100 right now.
Right.
Wow. Okay. There's a mayor? Is that correct?
No, we no longer have a mayor. The last mayor sold his house and moved away about 3 years ago. So there hasn't been a mayor or a city council since.
So basically, because the mayor moved away, there's nobody running the town.
Right.
How does that work?
Well, no, there really aren't any services except for the water district, and I'm really not sure who's picking up the checks for that now. It just sort of runs itself. We lost our water master probably 8 years ago.
Wow, Diana, you guys are just barely hanging on then.
Yes, actually, one of the other landlords and I have been really kind of pushing to get annexed by one of the two cities.
Why has that not happened?
Well, because we'd have to get buy-in from a city council, which we don't have. And we can't run for office because we don't live here.
If that's not a definition of a catch-22, I don't know what is.
It is.
Looking at the map, you guys are kind of basically being swallowed by Coeur d'Alene, but they're kind of picking parts around you.
Yes, everything is completely surrounded at this point by city of Coeur d'Alene or city of Post Falls. It can't go anywhere except being annexed, I would think.
But you need a city council to do that.
Yes.
And you don't have one.
No, we may have to recruit some of the retirees that live here to become a city council.
One of the 5.
One of the 5.
All right. Well, Diana, have a good rest of the day in Huetter.
Oh, yes. Thank you.
Well, along with owning some apartments in Huetter, Diana owns a Big Dog Used Cars, it's called, where she says she sells 1 to 2 cars a month. And there's a wall, she says, right behind her apartment complex that separates Huetter and Coeur d'Alene, or Post Falls. I can't remember which one. Diana wants the town to be annexed because, well, the water system, she mentioned, it's failing, and almost everyone there is on septic, which isn't good when you're less than a quarter mile from the Spokane River. So is Huetter a city or not? Is there a mayor or not? We called the Kootenai County office, and they said, well, there is a mayor, at least they thought there was, and they gave us the email of the city clerk because there is one of those for sure, but we still haven't heard back. When we do, though, we will let you know what's in the cards for Huetter. All right, a quick reminder, you can find us, the 208, on any of these platforms right here, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. On YouTube, you can watch all shows there, entire shows. If you miss any of our shows, you can catch them on YouTube. And of course, you can email us at the208@ktvb.com. Got time for a couple of comments from today's show. This one from Lori in Boise. Idaho's trigger law essentially vague. That's why DOJ is challenging it. This is what Idahoans get when people with zero medical education craft laws to appease their base. The taxpayers foot the legal bill once again. Regarding student loan forgiveness, that's great for those who struggle to pay student loans, but kind of a slap in the face to those who persevered and paid off their debt, says Pat. I want to read this from Rhonda really quickly. She said she was a teacher, paid off her student loans. Made payments on a teacher's salary. After 15 years teaching, she got her PhD. But after 35 plus years, she still owes $185,000 in loans. So yes, some people do need help. We'll see you tomorrow.